हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम बैक टू माय चैनल। तो आज की वीडियो में हम देखने वाले हैं एनसीईआरटी इकोनॉमिक्स क्लास 12, जिसमें आज हम देखेंगे चैप्टर 5 जो कि है मार्केट इक्विलिब्रियम। तो शुरू करते हैं हमारा आज का चैप्टर। दिस चैप्टर विल बी बिल्ट ऑन द फाउंडेशन laid down in chapters 2 and 4, where we studied the consumer and farm behavior when they are price takers. In chapter 2, we have seen that an individual's demand curve for a commodity tells us what quantity a consumer is willing to buy at different prices when he takes price as given. The market demand curve in turn tells us how much of the commodity all the consumers taken together are willing to purchase at different prices when everyone takes price as given. In chapter 4, we have seen that an individual farm supply curve tells us the quantity of the commodity that a profit maximizing farm would wish to sell at different prices when it takes price is given, and the market supply curve tells us how much of the commodity all the farms taken together would wish to supply at different prices when each farm takes price as given. In this chapter, we combine both consumers and farms' behavior to study market equilibrium through demand-supply analysis and determine at what price equilibrium will be attained. We also examine the effects of demand and supply shifts on equilibrium. At the end of the chapter, we will look at some of the applications of demand-supply analysis. Equilibrium, excess demand, excess supply. A perfectly competitive market consists of buyers and sellers who are driven by their self-interested objectives. Recall from chapters 2 and 4 that objectives of the consumers are to maximize their respective preference and that of the firms are to maximize their respective profits. Both the consumers and firms' objectives are compatible in the equilibrium. An equilibrium is defined as a situation where the plans of all consumers and firms in the market match and the market clears. In equilibrium, the aggregate quantity that all firms wish to sell equals the quantity that all consumers in the market wish to buy. In other words, market supply equals market demand. The price at which equilibrium is reached is called equilibrium price, and the quantity bought and sold at the price is called equilibrium quantity. Therefore, P star Q star is an equilibrium if QD into P star equals to QS into P star. Where P star denotes the equilibrium price and QDP star and QSP star denote the market demand and market supply of the commodity respectively at price P star. If at a price market supply is greater than market demand, we say that there is an excess supply in the market at that price, and if market demand exceeds market supply at a price, it is said that excess demand exists in the market at that price. Therefore, equilibrium in a perfectly competitive market can be defined alternatively as zero excess demand, zero excess supply situation. Whenever market supply is not equal to market demand and hence the market is not in equilibrium, there will be a tendency for the price to change. In the next two sections, we will try to understand what drives this change. Out of equilibrium behavior. From the time of Adam Smith 1723 to 1790, it has been maintained that in a perfectly competitive market, an invisible hand is at play which changes price whenever there is imbalance in the market. Our intuition also tells us that this invisible hand would raise the prices in case of excess demand and lower the prices in case of excess supply. Throughout our analysis, we shall maintain that the invisible hand plays this very important role. Moreover, we shall take it that the invisible hand, by following this process, is able to reach the equilibrium. This assumption will be taken to hold in all that we discuss in the text. Market equilibrium, fixed number of firms. Recall that in chapter 2 we have derived the market demand curve for price taking consumers, and for price taking firms the market supply curve was derived in chapter 4. Under the assumption of a fixed number of firms in this section, with the help of these two curves we will look at how supply and demand forces work together to determine where the market will be in equilibrium. when the number of farms is fixed. We will also we will also study how the equilibrium price and quantity change due to shifts in demand and supply curves. Figure 5.1 illustrates equilibrium for a perfectly competitive market. With a fixed number of farms, here SS denotes the market supply curve and DD denotes the market demand curve for a commodity. The market supply curve SS shows how much of the commodity farms would wish to supply at different prices. And the demand curve D details us how much of the commodity the consumer would be willing to purchase at different prices. Graphically, an equilibrium is a point where the market supply curve intersects the market demand curve because this is where the market demand equals market supply. At any other point, either there is excess supply or there is excess demand. To see what happens when market demand does not equal market supply, let us look in figure 5.1 again. In figure 5.1, if the prevailing price is P1, the market demand is Q, where Q1, whereas the market supply is Q1 dash. Therefore, there is excess demand in the market equal to Q1 dash Q1. Some consumers who are either unable to obtain the commodity at all or obtain it in insufficient quantity will be willing to pay more than P1. The market price would tend to increase, all other things remaining the same as price rises. Quantity demanded falls and quantity supplied increases. The market moves towards the point where the quantity that the farms want to sell is equal to the quantity that the consumers want to buy. This happens when price is P dash. The supply decisions of the farm only match with the demand decision of the consumers. Similarly, if the prevailing price is P2, the market supply Q2 will exceed the market demand Q2 dash at that price, giving price to excess supply equal to Q2 dash Q2. Some farms will not be then able to sell quantity they want to sell, so they will lower their prices. All other things remaining the same as price falls. Quantity demanded rises, quantity supplied falls, and at P dash P star the firms are able to sell the desired output since market demand equals market supply at that price. Therefore, P star is the equilibrium price and the corresponding quantity Q star is the equilibrium quantity. To understand the equilibrium, price, and quantity determination more clearly, let us explain it through an example. Example. Let us consider the example of a market consisting of identical farms producing same quality of wheat. Here, by identical, we mean that all farms have same cost structure. Suppose the market demand curve and the market supply curve for wheat are given by QD equals to 200 minus P equals to 0 for 0 less than equals to P less than equals to 200 for P greater than 200. QS equals to 120 plus P for P greater than equals to 10 and equals to 0 for 0 less than equals to P less than 10, where QD and QS denote the demand for and supply of wheat in kg respectively, and P denotes the price of wheat per kg in rupees. Since at equilibrium price market clears, we find the equilibrium price denoted by P star by equating market demand and supply and solve for P star. QD into P star equals to QS into P star. 200 minus P star equals to 120 plus P star. Rearranging terms, 2 P star equals to 80, P star equals to 40. Therefore, the equilibrium price of wheat is rupees 40 per kg. The equilibrium quantity denoted by Q star is obtained by substituting the equilibrium price into either the demand or the supply curves equation, since in equilibrium quantity demanded and supplied are equal. QD equals to Q star equals to 200 minus 40 equals to 160. Alternatively, QS equals to Q star equals to 120 plus 40 equals to 160. Thus, the equilibrium quantity is 160 kg at a price less than P star, say P days equals to 25. QD equals to 200 minus 25 equals to 175. QS equals to 120 plus 125 equals to 145. Therefore, at P1 equals to 25, QD greater than QS, which implies that there is excess demand at this price. Algebraically, excess demand ED can be expressed as ED of P equals to QD minus QS, 200 minus P minus 120 plus P equals to 80 minus 2P. Notice from the above expression that for any prices less than P star equals to 40, excess demand will be positive. Similarly, at a price greater than P star, say P2 equals to 45, QD equals to 200 minus 45 equals to 155, and QS equals to 120 plus 45 equals to 165. Therefore, there is excess supply at this price since QS greater than QD. Algebraically, excess supply ES can be expressed as ES of P equals to QS minus QD equals to 120 plus P minus 200 minus P equals to 2P minus 80. Notice from the above expression that for any price greater than P star equals to 40, excess supply will be positive. Therefore, at any price greater than P star, there will be excess supply, and at any price lower than P star, there will be excess demand. Wage determination in labor market. Here we will briefly discuss the theory of wage determination under a perfectly competitive market structure using the demand-supply analysis. The basic difference between a labor market and a market for goods is with respect to the source of supply and demand. In the labor market, households are the suppliers of labors, and the demand for labor comes from firms, whereas in the market for goods, it is the opposite. Here it is important to point out that by labor we mean the hours of work provided by laborers and not the number of laborers. The wage rate is determined at the intersection of the demand and supply curves of labor, where the demand for and supply of labor balance. We shall now see what the demand and supply curves of labor look like. To examine the demand for labor by a single firm, we assume that the labor is the only variable factor of production and the labor market is perfectly competitive, which in turn implies that each firm takes wage rate as given. Also, the firm we are concerned with is perfectly competitive in nature and carries out production with the goal of profit maximization. We also assume that given the technology of the firm, the law of diminishing marginal product holds. The firm, being a profit maximizer, will always employ labor up to the point where the extra cost she incurs for employing the last unit of labor is equal to the additional benefits she earns from that unit. The extra cost of hiring one more unit of labor is the wage rate, W. The extra output produced by one more unit of labor is its marginal product, MPL. And by selling each extra unit of output, the additional earning of the firm is the marginal revenue, MR, she gets from that unit. Therefore, for each extra unit of labor, she gets an additional benefit equal to marginal revenue times marginal product, which is called marginal revenue product of labor, MRPL. Thus, while hiring labor, the firm employs labor up to the point where W equals to MRPL and MRPL equals to MR into MPL. Since we are dealing with a perfectly competitive firm, marginal revenue is equal to the price of the commodity, and hence marginal revenue product or of labor in this case is equal to the value of marginal product of labor. Recall from chapter 4 that for a perfectly competitive firm, marginal revenue equals price. As long as the BMPL is greater than the wage rate, the firm will earn more profit by hiring one more unit of labor. And if at any level of labor employment BMPL is less than the wage rate, the firm can increase her profit by reducing a unit of labor employed. Given the assumption of the law of diminishing marginal product, the fact that the firm always produces at W equals to BMPL implies that the demand curve for labor is downward sloping. To explain why it is so, let us assume at some wage rate W1, demand for labor is 1 L1. Now suppose let us assume at some wage rate. Now suppose the wage rate increases to W2 to maintain the wage VMPL equality. VMPL should also increase. The price of the commodity remaining constant. This is possible only if MPL increases which in turn implies that less labor should be employed owing to the diminishing marginal productivity of labor. Since the farm under consideration is perfectly competitive, it believes it cannot influence the price of the commodity. Hence, at higher wage, less labor is demanded, thereby leading to a downward sloping demand curve. To arrive at the market demand curve from individual farms demand, we simply add up the demand for labor by individual farms at different wages, and since each farm demands less labor as wage increases, the market demand curve is also downward sloping. Having explored the demand side, we now turn to the supply side. As already mentioned, it is the households which determine how much labor to supply at a given wage rate. The supply decision is essentially a choice between income and leisure. On the other hand, individuals enjoy leisure and find work irksome, and on the other hand, they value income for which they must work. So there is a trade-off between enjoying leisure and spending more hours for work. To derive the labor supply curve for a single individual, let us assume at some wage rate W1, the individual supplies 1 units of labor. Now suppose the wage rises to W2. This increase in wage rate will have two effects. First, due to the increase in wage rate, the opportunity cost of leisure increases, which makes leisure costlier. Therefore, the individual will want to enjoy less leisure. As a result, they will work for longer hours. Second, because the increase in wage rate to W2, the purchasing power of the individual increases. So, she would want to spend more on leisure activities. The final effect of the increase in wage rate will depend on which of the two effects predominates. At low wage rates, the first effect dominates the second, and so the individual will be willing to supply more labor with an increase in wage rate. But at wage rates, the second effect dominates the first, and the individual will be willing to supply less labor for every increase in wage rate. Thus, we get a backward bending individual labor supply curve, which shows that up to a certain wage rate for every increase in wage rate, there is an increased supply of labor. Beyond this wage rate, for every increase in wage rate, labor supply will decrease. Nevertheless, the market supply curve of labor, which is obtained by aggregating individual supply at different wages, will be upward sloping because, though at higher wages, some individuals may be willing to work less, many more individuals will be attracted to supply more labor. With an upward sloping supply curve and downward sloping demand curve, the equilibrium wage rate is determined at the point where these two curves intersect. In other words, where the labor that the household wishes to supply is equal to the labor that the farms wish to hire. This is shown in the diagram. Shifts in demand and supply. In the above section, we studied market equilibrium under the assumption that taste and preferences of the consumers, prices of the related commodities, incomes of the consumers, technology, size of the market, prices of the inputs used in production, etc. remain constant. However, with changes in one or more of these factors, either the supply or the demand curve or both may shift, thereby affecting the equilibrium, price, and quantity. Here we first develop the general theory which outlines the impact of these shifts on equilibrium and then discuss the impact of changes in some of the above mentioned factors on equilibrium. Demand shift. Consider figure 5.2 in which we depict the impact of demand shift when the number of farms is fixed. Here the initial equilibrium point is E where the market demand curve D0 and the market supply curve SS0 intersect, so that Q0 and P0 are the equilibrium quantity and price respectively. Now suppose the market demand curve shifts rightward to DD2 with supply curve unchanged at SS0 as shown in panel A. This shift indicates that at any price, the quantity demanded is more than before. Therefore, at price P naught now, there is excess demand in the market equals to Q naught, Q naught dash dash. In response to this excess demand, some individuals will be willing to pay higher price and the price would tend to rise. The new equilibrium is attained at G, where the equilibrium quantity Q2 is greater than Q naught and the equilibrium price P2 is greater than P naught. Similarly, if the demand curve shifts leftward to DD1 as shown in panel B, at any price, the quantity demanded will be less than what it was before the shift. Therefore, at the initial equilibrium price P naught, now there will be excess supply in the market equals to Q naught dash Q naught, in response to which some firms will reduce the price of their commodity so that they can sell their desired quantity. The new equilibrium is attained at the point F at which the demand curve DD1 and the supply curve SS0 intersect and the resulting equilibrium price P1 is less than P0 and quantity Q1 is less than Q0. Notice that the direction of change in equilibrium, price, and quantity is same whenever there is a shift in demand curve. Having developed the general theory, we now consider some example to understand how demand curve and equilibrium quantity and price are affected in response to a change in some of the aforementioned factors, which are also enlisted in chapter 2. More specifically, we would analyze the impact of increase in consumers' income and an increase in the number of consumers on equilibrium. Suppose due to a hike in the salaries of the consumers, their income increase. How would it affect equilibrium? With an increase in income, consumers are able to spend more money on some goods. But recall from chapter 2 that the consumers will spend less on an inferior good with increase in income, whereas for a normal good price of all commodities and taste and preferences of the consumers held constant. We would expect the demand for the good to increase at each price as a result of which the market demand curve will shift rightward. Here we consider an example of a normal good like clothes, the demand for which increases with increase in income of consumers, thereby causing a rightward shift in the demand curve. However, this income increase does not have any impact on the supply curve, which shifts only due to some changes in the factors relating to technology or cost of production of the farms. Thus, the supply curve remains unchanged. In the figure 5.2a, this is shown by a shift in the demand curve from DD0 to DD2, but the supply curve remains unchanged at SS0. From the figure, it is clear that at the new equilibrium, the price of cloth is higher and the quantity demanded and sold is also higher. Now let us turn to another example. Suppose due to some reason there is increase in the number of consumers in the market for clothes. As the number of consumers increases, other factors remaining unchanged, at each price more clothes will be demanded. Thus the demand curve will shift rightwards. But this increase in the number of consumers does not have any impact on the supply curve, since the supply curve may shift only due to changes in the parameters relating to farms' behavior or with an increase in the number of farms as stated in chapter 4. This case again can be illustrated through figure 5.2a in which the demand curve DD0 shifts rightward to DD2, the supply curve remaining unchanged at S0. The figure clearly shows that compared to the old equilibrium point E at point G, which is the new equilibrium point, there is an increase in both price and quantity demanded and supplied. Supply shift. In figure 5.3, we show the impact of a shift in supply curve on the equilibrium price and quantity. Suppose initially the market is in equilibrium at point E, where the market demand curve DD0 intersects the market supply curve SS0, such that the equilibrium price is P0 and the equilibrium quantity is Q0. Now suppose due to some reason the market supply curve shifts leftward to SS2 with the demand curve remaining unchanged as shown in figure in panel A. Because of the shift at the prevailing price P0, there will be excess demand equal to Q0 dash dash Q0 in the market. Some consumers who are unable to obtain the goods will be willing to pay higher prices and the market price tends to increase. The new equilibrium is attained at point G where the supply curve SS2 intersects the demand curve DD0 such that Q2 quantity will be bought and sold at price B2. Similarly, when supply curve shifts rightward, as shown in panel B, at point P0 there will be supply excess of goods equals to Q0 dash. In response to this excess supply, some firms will reduce their price and the new equilibrium will be attained at F, where the supply curve SS1 intersects the demand curve DD0, such that the new market price is P1 at which Q1 quantity is bought and sold. Notice the directions of change in price and quantity are opposite whenever there is a shift in supply curve. Now, with this understanding, we can analyze the behavior of equilibrium price and quantity when various aspects of the market change. Here, we will consider the effect of an increase in input price and an increase in number of firms on equilibrium. Let us consider a situation where all other things remaining constant. There is an increase in the price of an input used in the production of a commodity. This will increase the marginal cost of production of the firms using this input. Therefore, at each price, the market supply will be less than before. Hence, the supply curve shifts leftward. In the figure 5.38, this is shown by a shift in the supply curve from SS0 to SS2. But this increase in input price has no impact on the demand of the consumers since it does not depend on the input prices directly. Therefore, the demand curve remains unchanged. In figure 5.38, this is shown where the demand curve remaining unchanged at DD0. As a result, compared to the old equilibrium, now the market price rises and quantity produced decreases. Let us discuss the impact of an increase in the number of farms. Since at each price now more farms will supply the commodity, the supply curve shifts to the right, but it does not have any effect on the demand curve. This example can be illustrated by figure 5.3b, where the supply curve shifts from S0 to S1, whereas the demand curve remains unchanged at DD0. From the figure, we can say that there will be a decrease in the price of commodity and increase in the quantity produced compared to the initial situation. Simultaneous shifts of demand and supply. What happens when both demand and supply curves shift simultaneously? The simultaneous shifts can happen in four possible ways. Both supply and demand curves shift rightwards. Both supply and demand curves shift leftwards. Supply curve shifts leftward and demand curve shifts rightward. Supply curve shifts rightward and demand curve shifts leftward. The impact on equilibrium, price, and quantity in all the four cases are given in table 5.1. Each row of the table describes the direction in which the equilibrium, price, and quantity will change for each possible combination of the simultaneous shifts in demand and supply curves. For instance, from the second row of the table, we see that due to a rightward shift in both demand and supply curves, the equilibrium quantity increases invariably, but the equilibrium price may either increase, decrease, or remain unchanged. The actual direction in which the price will change will depend on the magnitude of the shifts. Check this yourself by varying the magnitude of shifts for this particular case. In the first two cases, which are shown in the first two rows of the table, the impact on equilibrium quantity is unambiguous, but the equilibrium price may change, if at all, in either direction depending on the magnitudes of shifts. In the next two cases, shown in the last two rows of the table, the effect on price is unambiguous, whereas the effect on quantity depends on the magnitude of shifts in the two curves. तो ये है वो टेबल जिसमें दिखाया गया है इम्पैक्ट ऑफ साइमल्टेनियस शिफ्ट्स ऑन इक्विलिब्रियम. Here we give diagrammatic representation for case 2 and case 3 in figure 5.4 and leave the rest as exercise for the readers. In the figure 5.4a, it can be seen that due to rightward shifts in both demand and supply curves, the equilibrium quantity increases whereas the equilibrium price remains unchanged. And in figure 5.4b, equilibrium quantity remains the same, whereas price decreases due to a leftward shift in demand curve and a rightward shift in supply curve. Market equilibrium, pre-entry and exit. In the last section, the market equilibrium was studied under the assumption that there is a fixed number of firms. In this section, we will study market equilibrium when firms can enter and exit the market freely. Here, for simplicity, we assume that all the firms in the market are identical. What is the implication of the entry and exit assumption? This assumption implies that in equilibrium, no firm earns supernormal profit or incurs loss by remaining in production. In other words, the equilibrium price will be equal to the minimum average cost of the firms. To see why it is so, suppose at the prevailing market price, each firm is earning supernormal profit. The possibility of earning supernormal profit will attract some new firms. As new firms enter, the market supply curve shifts rightward. However, demand remains unchanged. This causes market price to fall. As prices fall, supernormal profits are eventually wiped out. At this point, with all firms in the market earning normal profit, no more firms will have incentive to enter. Similarly, if the firms are earning less than normal profit at the prevailing price, some firms will exit, which will lead to an increase in price. And with sufficient number of firms, the profits of each firm will increase to the level of normal profit. At this point, no more firm will want to leave since they will be earning normal profit here. Thus, with free entry and exit, each firm will always earn normal profit at the prevailing market price. Recall from the previous chapter that the firms will earn supernormal profit so long as the price is greater than the minimum average cost, and at price less than minimum average cost they will earn less than the normal profit. Therefore, at prices greater than the minimum average cost, new firms will enter, and at prices below minimum average cost, existing firms will start exiting. At the price level equal to minimum average cost of the firms, each firm will earn normal profit so that no new firm will be attracted to enter the market. Also, the existing firm will not leave the market since they are not incurring any loss by producing at this point. So, this price will prevail in the market. Therefore, free entry and exit of the firms imply that the market price will always be equal to the minimum average cost, that is, P equals to mean EC. From the above, it follows that the equilibrium price will be equal to the minimum average cost of the funds. In equilibrium, the quantity supplied will be determined by the market demand at that price so that they are equal. Graphically, this is shown in figure 5.5, where the market will be in equilibrium at point E, at which the demand curve DD intersects P0 equals to mean EC line, such that the market price is P0 and the total quantity demanded and supplied is equal to Q0. At P0 equals to mean AC, each firm supplies same amount of output. Say Q not F. Therefore, the equilibrium number of firms in the market is equal to the number of firms required to supply Q naught output at P naught, each in turn supplying Q naught F amount of the at that price. If we denote the equilibrium number of firms by N naught, then N naught equals to Q naught by Q naught F. To understand the equilibrium price and quantity determination more clearly, let us look at the following example. Example. Consider the example of a market for wheat such that the demand curve for wheat is given as follows. QD equals to 200 minus P for 0 less than equals to P less than equals to 200 and equals to 0 for P greater than 200. Assume that the market consists of identical firms. The supply curve of a single firm is given by QFS equals to 10 plus P for P greater than equals to 20 and 0 for 0 less than equals to P less than 20. The free entry and exit of firms would mean that the firms will never produce below minimum average cost because otherwise they will incur loss from production, in which case they will exit the market. As we know, with free entry and exit, the market will be in equilibrium at a price which equals the minimum average cost of the funds. Therefore, the equilibrium price is P0 equals to 20. At this price, market will supply that quantity which is equal to the market demand. Therefore, from the demand curve, we get the equilibrium quantity. Q naught equals to 200 minus 20 equals to 180. Also at P naught equals to 20 is firm supplies. Q naught F equals to 10 plus 20 equals to 30. Therefore, the equilibrium number of firms is N naught equals to Q naught by Q naught F equals to 180 by 30 equals to 6. Thus, with free entry and exit, the equilibrium price, quantity, and number of firms are rupees 20, 180 kg, and 6 respectively. Shifts in demand. Let us examine the impact of shift in demand on equilibrium price and quantity when the firms can freely enter and exit the market. From the previous section, we know that free entry and exit of the firms would imply that under all circumstances, equilibrium price will be equal to the minimum average cost of the existing firms. Under this condition, even if the market demand curve shifts in either direction, at the new equilibrium, the market will supply the desired quantity at the same price. In figure 5.6, DD naught is the market demand curve, which tells us how much quantity will be demanded by the consumers at different prices, and P naught denotes the price which is equal to the minimum average cost of the funds. The initial equilibrium is at point E, where the demand curve DD naught curves the P naught equals to mean EC line, and the total quantity demanded and supplied is Q naught. The equilibrium number of funds is N naught in this situation. Now suppose the demand curve shifts to the right for some reasons. At P naught there will be excess demand for the commodity. Some dissatisfied consumers will be willing to pay higher prices for the commodity. So the price tends to rise. This gives rise to a possibility of earning supernormal profit which will attract new funds to the market. The entry of these new funds will eventually will eventually wipe out the supernormal profit and the price will again reach P naught. Now, higher quantity will be supplied at the same price. From the panel A, we can see that the new demand curve DD1 intersects the P naught equals to mean AC line at point F, such that the new equilibrium will be P naught Q1, where Q1 is greater than Q naught. The new equilibrium number of firms N1 is greater than N naught because of the entry of new firms. Similarly, for a leftward shift of the demand curves to DD2, there will be excess supply at the price P naught. In response to this excess supply, some farms which will be unable to sell the desired quantity at P naught will wish to lower the prices. The price tends to decrease, which will lead to the exit of some of the existing farms, and the price will again reach P naught. Therefore, in the new equilibrium, less quantity will be supplied, which will be equal to the reduced demand at that price. This is shown in panel B, where due to the shift of demand curve from DD0 to DD2, quantity demanded and supplied will decrease to Q2, whereas the price will remain unchanged at P0. Here, the equilibrium number of firms N2 is less than N0 due to the exit of some existing firm. Thus, due to a shift in demand rightwards or leftwards, the equilibrium quantity and number of firms will increase or decrease, whereas the equilibrium price will remain unchanged. Here we should note that with free entry and exit, shift in demand has a larger effect on quantity than it does with the fixed number of firms. But unlike with fixed number of firms, here we do not have any effect on equilibrium price at all. Applications. In this section, we try to understand how the supply demand understand how the supply demand analysis can be applied. In particular, we look at two examples of government intervention in the form of price control. Often it becomes necessary for the government to regulate the prices of certain goods and services when their prices are either too high or too low in the comparison to the desired levels. We'll analyze these issues within the framework of perfect competition to look at this regulation what impact this regulation have on the market for this goods. Price ceiling. It is not very uncommon to come across instances where government fixes a maximum allowable price for certain goods. The government imposed upper limit on the price of a good or service is called price ceiling. Price ceiling is generally imposed on necessary items like wheat, rice, kerosene, sugar, and it is fixed below the market determined price. Since at the market determined price, some section of the population will not be able to afford these goods. Let us examine the effects of price ceiling on market equilibrium through the example of market up for wheat. Figure 5.7 shows the market supply curve SS and the market demand curve DD for wheat. The equilibrium price and quantity of wheat are P star and Q star respectively, where the government imposes price ceiling at PC, which is lower than the equilibrium price level. There will be an excess demand for wheat in the market at that price. The consumers demand QC kilograms of wheat, whereas the farms supply QC kilograms. Hence, though the intention of the government was to help the consumers, it will end up creating shortage of wheat. How is the quantity of wheat QC then distributed among the consumers? One way of doing this is to distribute it to everyone through a system of rationing. Ration coupons are issued to the consumers so that no individual can buy more than a certain amount of wheat, and this stipulated amount of wheat is sold through ration shops, which are also called fair price shops. In general, price ceiling accompanied by rationing of goods may have the following adverse consequences on the consumers. First, each consumer has to stand in long queues to buy the good from ration shops. Second, since all consumers will not be satisfied by the quantity of the goods that they get from the fair price shop, some of them will be willing to pay higher price for it. This may result in the creation of black market. Price floor. For certain goods and services, fall in price below a particular level is not desirable, and hence the government sets floors or minimum prices for these goods and services. The government imposed lower limit on the price that may be charged for a particular good or service is called price floor. Most well-known examples of imposition of price floor are agricultural price support programs and the minimum wage legislation. Through an agricultural price support program, the government imposes a lower limit on the purchase price for some of the agricultural goods, and the floor is normally set at a level higher than the market determined price for these goods. Similarly, through the minimum wage legislation, the government ensures that the wage rate of the laborers does not fall below a particular level, and here again the minimum wage rate is set above the equilibrium wage rate. Figure 5.8 shows the market supply and the market demand curve for a commodity on which price floor is imposed. The market equilibrium here would occur at price P star and quantity Q star. But when the government imposes a floor higher than the equilibrium price at PF, the market demand is QF, whereas the farm want to supply QF dash, thereby leading to an excess supply in the market equal to QF dash. In the case of agricultural support, to prevent price from falling because of excess supply, government needs to buy the surplus at the predetermined price. तो ये है इस चैप्टर का समरी और यह है इस चैप्टर का एक्सरसाइजेस। तो इसी के साथ हमारा आज का ये चैप्टर कंप्लीट होता है। तो अगर आप चैनल पे नए हैं तो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर दीजिए और नोटिफिकेशन आइकन पर क्लिक कर दीजिए ताकि आपको सारे वीडियोस के अपडेट्स मिल सकें। और अगर आपको वीडियो अच्छा लगे तो लाइक कर दीजिए, साथ ही अपने दोस्तों के साथ शेयर कीजिए ताकि उन्हें भी हेल्प हो सके। तो हमारा आज का सेशन यहीं तक था। थैंक यू। थैंक्स फॉर वॉचिंग।